Mute your mics, please.
The sound.
Good evening and welcome to Wisdom Wednesdays. I'm your host and moderator, Carol. And with us, we have this panel, wonderful panel with Soraya, Selvi, Fazana, Kamini, and Kyra. And as always, we have Amina backstage helping us along. So before we go further, I want to invite all our participants to please send in your questions. You know, this is a really important topic. And we would like to have some interactive, you know, not just agreeing with what we have to say, but perhaps asking us those difficult questions, perhaps. Today's subject is racism, a minority's duties and responsibilities. Last week, as you know, we spoke with regard to the majority and their responsibilities and their attitude towards racism. And we would fail if actually we didn't address how the minorities have to act to make a wholesome and unified Sri Lanka. I'd like to tell you about something that's been floating around in the last few weeks in social media and various other chat groups. There was this family who had a holiday home for 20 years in a village in Sri Lanka. They have helped build schools, hospitals, playgrounds, helped the children, and their children played with the village children. And this went on for 20 years. Recently, they heard that there was a family who was selling a piece of land in order to help their son, who was very ill with cancer. And the family stepped in and said, listen, if you want to sell the piece of land, we will buy you. It's one way of supporting you. So they said, okay, and they went to the table and they found at the table, the guy said, I'm very sorry, even if my son dies, I won't be able to sell this land to you because you're a Muslim. In addition, there was another story. This Muslim man, this man of Muslim faith, who was actually very devout in his faith, because that's what most religions ask you to do, help one another. And he decided to feed the sick and their families who came to the cancer hospital. And there was one who opened a ward to help people with the money he had. And I think it was after the Easter Sunday bombing when people went after him and said, you know, you shouldn't be feeding these people. You're a Muslim after all. And, you know, that's not in good faith. So, so there's all kinds of racism here. And just imagine, you know, those who objected to his feeding these sick did nothing to feed the sick thereafter. However, they stopped him from feeding the people who were needy. Just does not, you know, even fall true in my head. It's so difficult to decipher how somebody can upset the apple cart, so to speak, and just walk away and have a healthy conscience. So today, as I said, we want to talk about the minorities' duties. And obviously, these two people actually followed a minority's duties because they didn't pick and choose to help one or the other. You know, they just helped or offered to help where they saw a need. So with that, we will go to Soraya. Soraya, as you know, is an interfaith leader. She's a lawyer. She's a unifier. She's a multi-talented woman and multifaceted woman. Soraya wants to talk about moving beyond victimhood. I think it's a really serious subject. Soraya?
Oh, thank you, Carol. My pit in my stomach got worse. These stories of division and disrespect is really is becoming like an everyday situation in Sri Lanka. So before I proceed, I want to introduce our host, Kyra, who Carol. Carol has built 15 homes for women-led households. She's a social and environmental activist, co-founder of WIN, and also promotes gender equality through sports. So thank you again, Carol. I think this topic is very deep and near to me because I get to share some of my deepest concerns, hopes, and of course, fears. Because the discord we see today is real. The discord is dangerous and the discord is very, very divisive. And I think also that when we come to this topic, we have left the realm of constitutional rights and we are in the area of human rights because the situation is very grievous. So when we address this issue, we can become helpless, but let us not be hopeless. But we have to be really clear that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until we face it. This is James Baldwin. So the invitation today from us Women of Wisdom Wednesdays is we have to all collectively come together to face this that is eating into the very fabric, eating into the very soul of our nation. And in order to do that, we cannot just condemn Islamist extremism and justify Buddhist nationalist backlash. We can't just choose either or. I remember when the Easter Sunday attacks happened, I put out a video. I said, some are guilty, but all are responsible. And I stand by that statement every time because we're all responsible. We all have to do something. And I really folded my sleeves, wore my boots and got to work on how we can come together to resolve and solve and find creative solutions to this. I went to Minuangoda and where we brought together Muslim women about, we had informed the Imam that we were coming. A group of 3 of us activists went and we said, have women. And when we showed up at the mosque in Minuangoda, there was not one woman. So I said to the Imam, until you bring the women to this place, we are not leaving. So he whisked, I think he did some magic. And of course, women, patriarchal structures in the mosques, men yield a lot of power and authority. And in about 20 minutes, we had about 30 women. So we spoke to the women, we understood the ground conditions, and we organized a workshop for the women with some singular Muslim women and singular women in the village. So the day prior to the workshop, we get a call from the mosque imam. Hey, we can't have this program. We have to cancel it. So that is the level of non-understanding the gravity of the situation where it comes to the minorities' contribution. And my charge and my call is directly to the Muslim community today. We have to wake up from this slumber. This is not a time for religious orthodoxy and preaching faith. This is a time for us to embrace our national identity, our civic responsibility, and do everything that is necessary in collaboration and in solidarity with our majority Muslim, Sinhalese, Buddhist brothers and sisters, the Tamils, Tamil Hindus, and then of course the Christians. This is a moment. So because my time is limited, I am going to propose three ways in which we can be more creative moving forward. One, I believe, is we have to have a coalition of Buddhist and Muslim and Tamil businessmen that will work to be responsive to the needs of the poor. This is a suggestion that has not been explored as we should. this will unite us and bring us to a national cause. So I think the institutions, the businesses, it is high time they got engaged and involved, because the people have tried, it's not working. We need the businesses. That is where the money lies. That's where the influence lies. Come together to be responsive to the needs of the poor. Create a project that will unite the communities. And again, sometimes I feel like this is a call on the deaf today. The government has to launch a program and incentives that will promote these rights and minority engagement. It is very critical. And thirdly, my pet and my favorite is, let's create women-led movements where women devoid of religious orthodoxy have a full reign to address these issues in a smaller way in their community. And then we all come together in larger communities. I think my time is up. Thank you, Carol. We will have a discussion later.
Yes, thank you so much, Soraya. Definitely thought, provoking, and I want more people to be involved in this discussion. I think it's a really good idea, talking about businesses. I mean, that's one way to take the leadership role within this country. Selvi. So Selvi is a CEO of Purnam Foundation. She's a great reader of Hindu philosophy. And Selvi has been doing so many different things to help not women-headed households, but to make sure women earn an income. And I think that's another important area, Soraya, because if women have an income and they become a little bit more independent, perhaps the men will also see that this value also comes in economic terms. Selvi is going to talk about how the Tamil politicians have failed the minorities. Over to you, Selvi.
Thank you, Carol. And Soraya, that was such a wonderful presentation. And all what you said will apply to the Tamil minorities as well. Taking on a national identity and working together with the other communities is so important. But I would like to take you back to an incident in the history of Sri Lanka, which was the Hartal of 1953. That Hartal was a very unusual one, because in this one, the whole island participated. The transport completely came to a standstill. The bus, rail, tram, the rickshaw pullers, those days we used to have the rickshaw pullers who were men carrying the rickshaws. They joined the civil disobedience. Shops closed, offices closed, government offices, telephone, postal services, everything stopped functioning. The whole island was paralyzed. And behind this civil disobedience was Sinhala, Tamil, Muslim, Burgher, and plantation workers. They all participated together. There was total unity among all communities at the time in exercising their democratic right to show dissent. They all united behind the left parties in Sri Lanka, and the left parties have been working with Sri Lanka since 1935 with people in Sri Lanka. Professor Tissa Vitarana writes about how the whole country stood together. They were protesting against the newly elected UNP government's policies, a true show of solidarity and unity. The national unity that we are all wanting at this time was there in abundance at that time. But in 1956, Sinhala only was introduced. From then on, we see a gradual shift in the way people thought. We see the rise of Sinhala and tit-for-tat Tamil nationalism, with UNP, SLFP, and Federal Party taking the lead. But there was always a nagging question. Did the minorities buy into the majoritarian agenda to divide and rule by aligning with the linguistic parties? In order to understand this question, we need to briefly look at what happened to the Tamil community in the last 65 to 70 years during this Tamil nationalistic period. After almost 70 years of voting for Tamil parties, the situation of the Tamils were worse off than it was in 1953. In 1953, Tamil people were part of the mainstream movement, and most importantly, they had a sense of expansiveness because of the inclusiveness. There was togetherness, there was no division, no sense of them and us. Sinhala Tamil Burgher and Muslim stood together, shoulder to shoulder, in dealing with the problems faced by the Sri Lankans. But with the advent of Tamil nationalism, Tamils gradually became more and more politically alienated, excluded, discriminated, and fragmented. When the question was asked as to why Tamil cause was not succeeding in spite of the success of the Tamil parties in the polls, the usual rhetoric was that nationalism was not focused enough, it was not strong enough, and it should now evolve into an armed struggle. And so it did. LTT was born. Armed struggle became center stage. We have now seen how it ended. The disaster during the final days of the war has shown us linguistic nationalism has exhausted its momentum. There was no more space for it to evolve. Tamil people had arrived at a dead end and not knowing how to turn back. Minorities were in a political vacuum, and they are. There were no alternative mainstream politics they could engage with. By aligning with linguistic parties, the country had lost out on politics that represent interests of the Sri Lankans as a whole. Lost out on parties that are inclusive because they had died a natural death. The only way for the minorities at the moment, in addition to what Soraya was saying, now they have to begin the arduous task of returning to the mainstream. It might take time to undo what was done in 70 years, but it needs to begin somewhere, sometime. Thank you, Carol.
So Selvi, I think, as you rightly said, this having a party for Tamils, having a party for Muslims, this tends to alienate you from everybody else. You're only worried about your concerns, which can be valid. I mean, I'm not saying that they are not valid. But if you don't work for all the people and you're only trying to work for some of the people, how do you expect to get ahead? Because you ignore everybody else's needs and requirements and just focus on your own. So Selvi, do you have any ideas about how we go in the future with these so-called parties that are only representing one of the minorities? I mean, minorities also have to take responsibility. While we also say, as a majority, the people need to look with empathy at the minorities and look for equal representation, which we obviously don't have in some cases. But how is it that the minorities can make this difference and show the way, perhaps? Selvi?
See, the minorities, by identifying themselves as Tamils and Tamil nationalists, what they are doing in effect is they're isolating themselves and their problems. But as you know, the problems in this country, whether it be Muslims, Sinhalese, Christians, Tamils, whoever, the problems are economic. As soon as you identify your problems as Tamil problems, then what you have done is essentially you have negated the rights of working for the problems of the Muslims and the Buddhist minorities, or Buddhist majorities and the Muslim minorities. So the problems are people's problems. They're Sri Lankan problems. We have to have a Sri Lankan identity. We cannot, and it has shown that we cannot actually win by going the nationalistic, this racial politics cannot succeed. It cannot actually win the hearts of the other minorities or the majority. So we have to take the whole population together. And that's why I think what Soraya said is very, very pertinent. We have to start with bringing people together, the civil society together, the business people together, and if at all possible, to bring the politicians together. I think that's the only way to do it. And we cannot go along the lines of voting for Muslim, Tamil, Christian, whatever parties. It has to be mainstream.
Thank you, Carol. I think we just got a question. Fazli says there is a fear psychosis in the Muslim community. And I agree with him. It's a well-grounded, well-founded fear psychosis. But here's what I suggest. We have to take our activism outside of our mosques, of our places of worship. The religious actors have represented us way too long, and they have their institutions to maintain. We are in a crisis here. Do we have a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year plan for the Muslims in Sri Lanka? Nobody does. Nobody does. So this is why even where we have created a conversation called the Muslim Roundtable. We want to build a third track where we come together and understand the social ills, the social problems, which the religion does not have is not a solution, does not have a solution for our current social ills. We have to think beyond religion, because we have to understand there's the text and there's the context. So I think one of the gravest things that we are falling behind in the Muslim community is reaching out to the text for every modern day social problem and ill. And that has to stop. And I'm not talking only about Sri Lanka. I travel to Nigeria, Bangladesh. It is the same story. So I know this. I cannot change that view.
Yeah, Chami says, sorry, there's a question. Sorry, Kamini, I'll come back to you. Chami says, how do the minorities who have felt the hurts, how do they overcome, so that maybe we start some healing. I think, Kamini, you can speak better to that.
Well, yeah, but before that, I mean, I totally agree with Chami, because for me, my concern, my challenge is, okay, then, because there's decades of suppression and, discrimination against particular groups based on religion, unfortunately, on race in Sri Lanka. So how do those concerns be addressed? I mean, what is the best way forward? Is it, I mean, in Austria, for example, you see how, parties are issue-based. We have a right-wing approach and a left-wing approach. But interestingly, they have now become a coalition because they feel that they need to go on a middle path. And, you see some positive results. I don't know. I have no answers. But my concern when I hear that is, okay, what happens to because the issues are very specific to each race or religion based on what the discrimination base has been. In terms of healing, yeah, healing is not just the energy healing and all that, but also there's a really important place, I believe, of acknowledging that this hurt is there. I mean, we have so many children, Sinhalese and Tamil, who have watched their fathers be killed, families being, torn apart, and so much violence, be it through the war or even through these riots, communal riots that have been experiencing. And if there's no recognition and acknowledgement, and there's no reparations, and there's no space to air those concerns and first be heard, how can you start healing? That's something I feel that has to come to the forefront. And then can you only, if you're acknowledged, only can you then and other people understand, yeah, there is an issue here, we need to help, we need to, be it businessmen, whoever, we need to pay for people's services so that they can access therapy, trauma, counseling, whatever, because our country really needs it. And it's going to be
significant. The thing is, Kamini, I think, we all understand, we are mixed here in this very group that we have here. We have mixed from different minorities or majority or whatever you want to call it. The problem is we always wait for government to make a change. And yes, I think that's important. But how can we start within ourselves? I think sometimes we expect so much from government. And while government is elected to serve the people, whether here or everywhere else, sometimes you find them serving themselves. So we the people need to be the change we want to see. I always say this, right? We need to start somewhere. I mean, Soraya had this idea of maybe businesses stepping in and saying, hey, let's do something. And maybe if we show this is the will of the people, whether we want to heal people, whether we want reparations, we want just a simple apology, who is going to make that apology? So can we do it? I think, Selvi, there's some of us here who remember those days when a name meant nothing. I mean, we never thought in terms of Tamil or Sinhala or Burger or anything. We were just kids having a blast with this multitude of families and multitude of celebration, right? We remember this.
Yeah.
So
Carol, you always bring so much heart and integrity to this conversation. The way you were raised. Today, we are in a dangerous social situation where it is celebrated to hate the other person. It is celebrated to put somebody down. I have never witnessed a culture such as this that is emboldened politically, that it has become okay. And we have a daunting task, because the government has no policy on this. The government doesn't weigh in on this. We don't have leaders in our country talking about national unity. On the contrary, anything is fodder. Everyone is fodder. So you are quite right. This needs a two-prong attack. Personal commitments are very, very critical.
What if we start with the personal commitment? Maybe then government will see this is the will of the people. But as long as government thinks we fall in line, any government that comes, I'm not pointing fingers at any particular person. I think they are all collectively responsible for this hole we are in today. Whether it's the minority parties, whether it's the majority party, they didn't take into consideration how to unify a nation. And that unification will bring out the best in people, and we'll have a much better future for the children coming up, right? On that note, we will discuss this further. I want to go to Fazana. So Fazana, as you know, is a behavior specialist. Fazana wants to talk about beyond Islamophobia. Beyond Islamophobia, who are we really? And coexistence in harmony.
Thank you, Carol. I think most of us have spoken on the same lines as what I want to say. And I think I really liked what Soraya said about context versus text, and also the comments from Fazli, I think, about reaching out to the imams and so on, because I think what happens is the text is used so powerfully that people forget the context in which we are. And this, I think, is the vehicle to reach out to our religious leaders and say to take things more pragmatically in the context in where we are living today. So Islamophobia, as you all know, is an exaggerated fear, hatred, and hostility towards Islam and Muslims that is perpetuated by negative stereotypes, resulting in bias, discrimination, and the marginalization and exclusion of Muslims from social, political, and civic life. So Islamophobia existed in premise before the terrorist attacks of 9/11, but I think it increased in frequency and notoriety towards the past decade. So with a population of 1.62 billion, which is 23% of the world's population, Muslims live in every country of the world. They are a majority in approximately 50 countries and territories and live as minorities everywhere else. In today's interconnected world, Muslim minorities are increasingly taking on roles as advocates of justice and freedom and as ambassadors to Muslim majority countries. So nevertheless, Muslim minority communities have the responsibility to integrate into the civic and social fabrics of the societies they live in. I think this is what we've been talking about so far, and not just living isolated enclaves based on ethnicity or religion. Understanding and fully engaging in the social systems around them, and not as outsiders, but as active stakeholders, is part of the shift. So, I mean, we are talking today about minority duties, and I think this is one of the primary duties. This will bring the sense of belonging, which Selvi spoke about in 1953. The sense of belonging also needs to be taught to future generations. This is another question that came on: how can we make this happen? I think we'll have to start at least with the youth, with the younger generation, and bring this kind of thinking to the youth. living and participating as full citizens within society is a necessary step towards building cohesive new identities that are not just dysfunctional amalgamations of existing fractured ones. Just as Muslim minorities have both rights and responsibilities as citizens of non-Muslim majority countries, the same expectations apply to minority and marginalized communities living in Muslim majority countries as well, like in Saudi Arabia. As you know, there are issues in the other flip side of the coin as well. So I just want to take you through an example in my community here. I live in Talawatugoda, and we have a society called Ekamutu Samithya with over 200 households, and I'm the only Muslim member of this community. And I must say, I have never felt discriminated, and I'm here for 11 years. It's also how we react, how our attitude, how we coexist, how we participate. We celebrate all religious functions, and I contribute to all functions. We celebrate Independence Day. We also have our Utsavaya. Then we celebrate our religions and invite people home. And I also do other things such as little behavior change. As Carol said, I'm a behavior change specialist. So I get all the little kids from the neighborhood and have tea for them and teach them good habits such as prevention of sexual abuse, hand washing, which is now very important in a COVID context, and nutrition and other areas of behavior which we want the future generations to develop. So this is going, what I'm trying to say is you go beyond religion, beyond focusing the framework of religion into who we are as a human race. End of the day, we are all human beings. And I think today in a COVID context, as much as Selvi said, we all need to stand up together as Sri Lankans, I think we have to stand up together as one earth, because we're all standing up against COVID, and we need to, work together on that. And I want to also say that minority communities need to engage with and respect people of all faith and practices and embrace pluralism. Many faiths communities come together to stand shoulder to shoulder during times of crisis like now, but the relationship building that happens beforehand is even more important. So one more dent that causes a lot in modern day is the media. Today's context, media plays a very important role, and I really want to touch on this today, where each minority community must tell its own story and use social media in a positive way to convey it, while proactively and preemptively engaging and educating the media industry. Because I feel some of the biggest damages has been caused by the media, and minorities should not overreact to events and media reports of events. And the media should work towards normalizing the portrayal of minorities rather than demonizing them. Thank you, Carol.
Yeah, Fazana, some of us who have lived overseas, we understand what it is like. Sri Lankans, they look at Sri Lankans and they take them to their heart, because I think Sri Lankans overseas tend to assimilate much better than we do here. And, unlike some other communities who travel overseas, Sri Lankans don't hang together. They mix with the local population. And that's one way of, understanding each other's needs and requirements and not seem so threatening to somebody else who's watching him. Some years ago, we were doing some work bridging communities through sports. We took a Tamil village, kids from a Tamil village to a Muslim village in Kakiankulam. And we, through the cricket board, we had conducted this cricket program. And I had a chance to sit and I was seated when some imams came and they were watching this game. And I engaged them in a conversation. And, I think dialogue is key, Soraya. Don't you think? Dialogue is key. If we actually take the time to talk to somebody else and see how they feel and tell them how we feel, we have a better chance of progressing. I'm going to take some time off Kamini. I mean, Kamini yielded some of her time to me because this is actually her time to speak. But as a Christian, I wanted to say something. Our Archbishop, I'm a Catholic. Sometimes I have to say, we the Catholics feel that he plays politics. But he came up really strong during the Easter Sunday bombings. Easter is the holiest of holy days to Christians. While Christmas is celebrated with much more fervor, this is the day the Christ was risen. So for us, it's much more meaningful. We wear our new clothes, we wear new shoes, everything is new, you know, everything at home is very festive, etc. So there couldn't have been a worse day to attack the Christian community. However, I think the Archbishop played a huge role in holding the peace. I think Christians in Sri Lanka, for the most part, are a peaceful people, and they just get on with their business. When this happened, the few times or 1 or 2 times that somebody tried to instigate a riot, there were political hands behind it. And it was not the people, it wasn't the Christian people who went out saying, let's beat up somebody else or burn something out. So I'm really happy that that happened, and the Cardinal played a huge role. I mean, we have a hierarchy in Christianity, so we kind of look up to, unlike some of the other religions, you know, or philosophies that don't have a hierarchy and they are not answerable to somebody bigger than they are. We Christians do. And so, you know, we look to the Archbishop to actually play a more peaceful role and not get into the political, you know, whatever that goes on. The second thing I wanted to say is, you know, sometimes Christians are looked at with animosity because of conversions that take place. Most of these conversions take place from evangelists. But you know what? Being born into a faith or a race is an accident of birth, as I've said before. We could be born next door into some other religion and not some other race. So perhaps when you're an adult, you have the choice of choosing what you want to be. But in reality, that is looked at with great suspicion, and it's not, you know, looked at with kindness. However, the way it happens is a lot of the time, Christians and Muslims, actually within our religion, we are supposed to go out and help somebody else, right? So that's what we do. We go out, we help the poor, we try to help the sick, we try to, you know, that's the way we earn merit. In Hinduism and Buddhism, I think most often you take something to the temple, right? It's not like the priests take it and give it to other people. So maybe, you know, there's something different. Maybe this is one way of looking at it. Maybe if we have, you know, I know Hindus and Buddhists, they do individual kinds of and acts of compassion and helping other people. But as a religion or a philosophy or whatever, I mean, where Christians and Muslims put a lot of faith in doing good to help somebody out there. You know, even Buddhists, you know, they take the puja to the temple. It's in the Hindus, you take the puja to the temple. So I don't know whether it's a simplistic way of looking at it, but I think there's something to it. And maybe more people of other religions also practice some of that, you know, not as individuals, but seem to. Even the monks and the pusari and whoever seem to do it, you know. Maybe these conversions may not even happen. I mean, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I have no opinion on that I want to voice here. As I said, this is not a political show, but maybe we need to. Yeah.
After the Easter attacks, you know, Islamist jihadis attacked several churches. How do you think is the relationship between the Muslims and the Christians? Is it strained, or is that
so? No, I can speak to myself, you know. I think if you really follow a religion or a teaching, one turns, you know, Christians say turn the other cheek. Not necessarily, you know, we want to get brutalized again. But we did not look at every Muslim as being a perpetrator. So that's where we go wrong. You know, there are good and bad people, good, bad, and ugly people in every denomination, every race, every sect, every country. We can't box and lump everybody together in the same thing. There are wonderful people out there, the 2 stories I related at the beginning of this show. So no, I had no hatred towards Muslims. I can speak for myself. I don't think my family did either. Of course, we hurt. It was extremely painful. It still is extremely painful today. The one thing I may have thought at the time was maybe what we call the more, not liberal, that's not the right word to use, but more thinking Muslims speak out. You know, we wanted people to speak out because that felt that some of it could ease our pain, perhaps. You know, on that,
Carol,
pass it
on this
yeah.
on this matter, I'd like to say that I was part of some of the meetings that were brought together by the Christian priests and archbishops and whoever was in Colombo at that time. And it was amazing how all of them, all denominations of Christianity came up and said, hold your peace, do not respond to provocation,
Yeah.
you know. So
Yeah.
the thing is, when these kind of things happen, I think it's very important that the religious leaders hold the peace within the people, because no kind of tit for tat is going to help anybody. So that was so useful, and it was really, really good that the Christian community held its peace, and it held its peace with not just the Muslim community, but within the country. Because as you know, there was no response, there was no retaliation for that. It was a wonderful gesture on part of the Christian minorities.
You know, Sylvie, I don't know if you know, but in our Sunday prayers, we have a prayer for Sri Lanka, and we pray for everybody in Sri Lanka, whatever religion or race they are, you know, and we pray for unity in Sri Lanka. So if anybody ever followed a Christian service, there is no animosity towards somebody else. What we do is we pray for each other and we forgive each other. So maybe, you know, it's one way of looking at it, because we are more, you know, as a group we pray. You know, a lot of people pray on their own, you know, their spirituality is within. So maybe that's one way of looking at it, you know. Anyway, Kamini, sorry I held you up here with my long story. So Kamini loves to describe herself as a Sri Lankan. She's more things than that, as you all know. Shanti Margam being one of them, and here, Kamini, you can reach to the youth, you know, and this is what we were all talking about previously. Kamini wants to talk to the need for intelligence, acknowledgement, and healing for unity.
Thanks so much, Caroline. Absolutely, I'm so glad that you spoke, because we need to hear everyone's voices. And I'm so glad that you shared your experiences. I wanted to speak a bit more about, you know, where I say need for intelligence, for example, and maybe this kind of derails the conversation in a way, and it may be more linked to what we were saying last time. It's about using our brains, because, for example, one of the things that has started in the recent past is spreading these really crazy stories and rumors and untruths with no scientific basis, no evidence whatsoever. For example, before Digana riots, there was this whole story of a pill being introduced by Muslims into beef or to food to stop reproduction. And it's amazing that these spread like wildfire. And I think 50% of women in Sri Lanka, 50% of our population are women, and so many of them do take birth control and have a knowledge. How is it that these stupid stories were able to spread like wildfire? And that's why I say we need intelligence. I mean, fortunately, in that issue, UNFPA and the Ministry of Health, I also believe, they came forward and they issued a statement saying, you know, you cannot introduce birth control pills like that. If at all you take an emergency contraceptive pill, which can maybe, you know, help in some way in controlling, but that's a one-off thing. And, you know, there are certain conditions that need to be around. But what I'm trying to say is the need for using intelligence. It seems like, and even not only the majority say singular Buddhists, but even if you're non-Muslim or the group that is not being targeted, there's an intelligence that we need to start using when these stories start coming out and start, you know, putting out the right information. And for example, we've also seen people were happy about, say, when that the pasta factory that was owned by a Muslim was burned down. You know, there were so many Sinhalese people who were employed by that factory, no limit, you know, and it's like cutting the nose to spite the face. which takes me to the South African rule of folklore of Ubuntu. What hurts you hurts me. And I think we really need to start understanding what that means in order for us to start acting, being more proactive. When you hurt someone else, when you hurt another person or a minority or anyone else, it is going to hurt you at the end of the day. When I wanted to talk about need for acknowledgement, is the need to acknowledge everything that is being said by everyone on this panel, everyone in the chat box, everyone who has been speaking for years about the discrimination and everything that has been happening in Sri Lanka, and also across the world, but today we are focusing on unity in Sri Lanka. And, you know, Tina was saying, how is it that families abroad, overseas, the children, the next generation carries so much anger? And I feel it's because we don't acknowledge families. A lot of families have also left Sri Lanka, like after the 83 riots, families fled. They lost so much. And where was the acknowledgement? And that pain is passed on to children. We've talked about intergenerational transmission of trauma. And, you know, so then the next generation is reliving this trauma. And we need to work with youth. We need to work and acknowledge what has happened. And I like the idea of Carol saying, why shouldn't we get together and give an apology? And I think that's something where that just started to get me thinking, actually. And I wanted to refer to Mandela. One of the things he said in his trial, the Rivonia trial, where he was sentenced ultimately to 27 years of imprisonment. He said it's called the I am the first accused. And two statements, he says, who will deny that 30 years of my life have been spent knocking in vain, patiently, moderately, and modestly at a closed and barred door? What have been the fruits of moderation? The past 30 years have seen the greatest number of laws restricting our rights and progress. Until today, we have reached a stage where we have almost no rights of all. And he says, the time comes in the life of any nation where there remain only two choices, submit or fight. That time has now come to South Africa. We shall not submit, and we shall have no choice but to hit back by all means in our power in defense of our people, our future, and our freedom. And if you look at the history of ANC, African National Congress, they started out as a non-violent party, and they followed a lot of Gandhi's approaches in protesting, but were not heard. And ultimately, they turned to violence to be heard. And is that what we want? And do we want something? I mean, we're already seeing enough violence. Do we want more? Do we want another war? I don't know. It's a question that we all have to answer. And then the need for healing. As I said before, people have lost from both sides, and working with the youth is so important. We did a camp in one of my places where I worked before, where we brought Sinhalese and Tamil youth together. And there was a Sinhalese boy in the army who had lost his leg due to the war. And when he saw a Tamil person, a Tamil youth, he said, I don't want to have anything to do with this person. Don't even sit on my same bench. And then 3 days after the camp had proceeded, and it was at the closing date, he was like, please come home. I understand much more now. And there was reconciliation. And I think we all play a part. We all have to play roles in creating spaces for reconciliation and understanding. And as Carol said, for example, Shanti Marga, my organization, we talk a lot about nonviolence, and it's not only about gender-based violence, but it's also about understanding multiracial issues. And whenever there's a riot or something, we have conversations, difficult conversations, but we have them because we need to start doing that and working with the next generation. And I think we've been talking about, okay, what do we do? Acknowledging, accepting what has happened, reparations. Kyra referred to the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, because in South Africa, they became so important in creating a space for people to listen, people to forgive, people to talk about their pain that they have experienced from both sides. I mean, we've had in the North over, years of people protesting, looking for missing persons. I mean, just imagine if it was yourself. I would go mad if I had no idea where my sister or my mother were. So that's what I want to say in this segment. But yeah.
Thanks, Kams. Thank you. Kyra. So Kyra is a mindfulness and meditation teacher. She was a bhikkhuni for 15 years. And, she has so much wisdom that she has, found maybe in these 15 years. And so Kyra wants to talk about the experience of the US minorities. As you all know, we watch daily news in what's happening in the United States. So undoing internalized oppression is a subject Kyra wants to talk about. Over to you, Kyra.
Thank you, Carol. And I hope that what I'll be sharing from the US perspective is relevant and supportive of this very insightful conversation from all of you. I just want to start, since we've been mentioning South Africa, by saying there are more Black people incarcerated in the US today than there ever were in South Africa under apartheid. Okay, I just read that recently and it was very painful. So we have a major problem in the United States. I'm very happy to have seen that yes, there is a measure from June 4th brought to the Congress that's beginning to go through the legal process to see if it will get ratified to hold a truth and reconciliation process on racism. But in terms of what minorities can do for ourselves, I want to just tell a story. I gave a presentation on Juneteenth a few weeks ago, which is the celebration of when all enslaved people were finally freed. It was in 1865, 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation in Texas. But on this celebration of this day, I was sharing the words of an enslaved person who was interviewed in the 1940s. He had been enslaved. His name was Fountain Hughes. And he told the interviewer, he said, because the interviewer was a white man and was, saying how much he wanted, to give Black people and people of color rights and that they should have, they should be given all these things that they deserved. And he said, you can't give me my humanity or my freedom. That's belongs to me when I'm born. We're born with it. You can stop me from having access to what I need, but you can't give me my freedom. You can't give me my humanity. So I just felt like that was such an important reframing from someone who'd actually lived as an enslaved person before slavery ended, to say, you can't give this to me, I have it, right? So any one of us in a oppressed group in any country, it's really important to know that and to feel that this isn't, our worth doesn't come from outside, it comes from inside of us. The other thing I want to share is that what we're seeing now with what we call, I've been hearing them called fed up risings, these uprisings that are because people are just can't take this anymore. As Kamini was saying, once people, try peacefully, if it doesn't work, then, you have to find another way to be heard. So, what we're seeing in this time is that much was done in the 1960s, right? Laws were changed, but mindsets, hearts didn't necessarily change along with the laws. This is deeper than the laws. This is deeper than words or ideas or thoughts. This is, racism, discrimination, communalism, religious nationalism, this is happening at a deeper layer of our psyche, and we can get manipulated in ways that we're not even aware of, right? So we're dealing with, you know, all this racial unrest right now in our country because the civil rights movement only took care of one layer, and we need to go deeper, you know, plus the fact that conservative governments undid a lot of the things that the civil rights movement allowed for, like undoing the Voting Rights Act, basically. So one of the things Selvi mentioned was the divide and conquer strategy, and how economically, you know, those in minority situations often have a lot in common with those on the lower tiers in the majority, right? And that's something we've seen in the US also. During slavery times, poor whites were seeing themselves as very much in the same boat as enslaved Africans, as Black people. And they joined together to have to riot and to, you know, so white and Black people together challenged this elitist slave plantation, slave owner society. And that's when they instituted whiteness. The idea of whiteness was to keep poor white people from identifying with the economic reality of poverty and their solidarity with Black people. So then it became more in poor white people's interest to have the you know, upper hand of being white than it did to actually get out of poverty. And you see that all across Middle America and Kentucky, where you have poor white people voting against their own interests. Really, they're voting for governments that are making them poorer and poorer and poorer, but they're identifying as white. It's a really powerful identity to rally around. It makes you feel like you belong, right? But it's a fiction, and it's a fiction used to separate people for the purpose of the elite and maintaining control. And it's happened through many points in history in many different countries. You've seen indigenous you know, in Latin America, the same thing. You had moments where indigenous and poor, you know, Latin American folks came together, and then they got crushed by the elites and their through identity politics. So so this piece about you know, and then so that's just a question for you all. I'm a visitor here, but is that a dynamic that's being used here to manipulate low income, low wealth Sinhala Sri Lankans to identify more as Sinhala, but to their detriment, just so that they won't identify and be in solidarity with minorities who are having maybe, you know, some similar economic difficulties. And then the last piece I just want to share to pick up on what Kamini was saying about reparations is, okay, I know this is about the minorities' rights and responsibilities, or duties and responsibilities, and those are real. But I also feel like, you know, when I was in Jaffna and all over the North, seeing these plaques that said, "There's no future without forgiveness," it felt very ironic, honestly. Even I'm a visitor and I don't know even all the history, but it just felt like, well, who's saying that? It was in places where the army bases were, you know. It's one thing to say that, but it's another thing to act in a way that helps create good faith and allows forgiveness to be possible. So, you know, it's very much a part of an oppressive system to say, we did this to you and now you just have to get over it so we can move forward, right? But for real change and real healing to happen, there needs to be an acknowledgement of harm. There needs to be apologies. There needs to be giving voice, giving dignity to those who have lost family members and never found them, to atrocities, there has to be an owning up that this was wrong. And, you know, a space for people to be heard, and not to deepen the divide, but to bridge the divide. And so we've talked about that before as well, in terms of, you know, ceremonies of healing. But I see on our chat, there's a lot of interest in what it would mean to do truth and reconciliation here in Sri Lanka. I think there needs to be more space in public discourse given to what it means to really heal, because you can't just cover over. I mean, Selvi, others have been saying the history isn't even told in the schools, you know, so how can we heal?
Well, Kyra, you know, while I was telling that story about the Easter Sunday bombing, Fazana sent me a message inbox saying, you know, I'm sorry for your pain. You know, I mean, she didn't have to do that. I know you guys, you know, we love each other and we care about each other's, you know, better spirits and healing and whatever. However, you know, there's so much in that word sorry. There's even in a domestic argument, or even if it's an argument between siblings, just that word sorry. You know, my mom used to say, don't let the sun go down on your anger. In other words, apologize before the sun goes down. You know, you have your fight, it's okay. You know, you're allowed to disagree, you're allowed to argue, but don't let the sun go down on your arguments. You know, I have to write this book of mummyisms one of these days. I'm sure you all have these same mummyisms that we were brought up by, right? And my mother was a teacher, she worked, but yet with a large family, she had these one-liners that sort of cut you down in size pretty fast. So, oh gosh, look at the time, guys. You know, we have to continue. I just want to tell the audience, you know, we are on Facebook live streaming, we are on podcasts, we are on Instagram, we are all over. Please do us a favor, share these documents and these links with everybody, because more and more people have to join in this meaningful conversation. We don't want to preach to anybody. We just want to share our experiences, so we get you guys thinking in the same manner. On that note, I want to hand over to Soraya. Soraya, please, the call for action. We haven't had that many questions from people, so yeah.
Okay, I'll do a quick sum up. I think one of the major concerns the Sinhala Buddhists have with the Muslims is that we don't love the country. We are here to take over the country, and then we want to overpopulate. These are some of the strong concerns. So our message to people when they hear this is, you know, it's the Fazana is a Rotarian, and I don't know who else is. There's a simple moral code. All we got to ask is this the truth? What I'm hearing, is this the truth? Is it fair to the others who are concerned? Just ask these simple questions. Will it build goodwill and friendships? Or will this conversation, this allegation benefit us all? And I mean, if you tick it off as a no, you know what to do. Be in a state of inquiry and engagement and friendship. And finally, I want to make a point. We are not here to help you understand. Don't get this wrong. Because we have all got to realize that my liberation and your liberation is bound together. So it's not about me helping you. So our call from Wisdom Wednesdays is ask those pertinent questions, recognize our destiny is bound together, and please keep the door of national unity open. Keep it open, see that it remains open so that others can pass through that. This is the mantle of our generation. Thank you.
So on that note, guys, I want to ask participants who joined in and those who watch our show after the fact, please remember the next forum is on the 8th of July. We started doing this every 2 weeks, 8th of July at 7 o'clock. So we changed the time to ensure that some of you who go to work can find the time to log on and join in this conversation. Thank you so much from the panel and myself. Stay safe. We're still in the COVID situation. You know, have respect for each other. I saw a few people out today without their face masks, and the face mask is not just about you, it's about the other person. So, you know, be a good citizen. One other thing I just wanted to add, Soraya said, people look at Muslims with some kind of, threat element. We Christians, I think all together, all the denominations probably come around 10%. And I think Muslims come around 10%. I asked somebody today, what's the percentage of Muslims here? So when you hear people out there saying, they are breeding and they want to take over this country, don't believe it. Who does that benefit? Who does that benefit? Don't listen to me either. Please do your own research. Find out for yourself. Is this even a possibility? It's not, guys. Sri Lanka is for all of us. We are all Sri Lankans. Let's fight for this united Sri Lanka, because that's what we are going to leave our children in the future. So on that note, thank you so much from Wisdom Wednesdays. These ladies are wonderful, and we are going to be here on the 8th of July. Please join us then. Good night.